Hello, my name is Paul Taylor. I'm a budget analyst for the Office of Public Instruction, and I would like to share with you methodologies and information relating to a portion of the $75 million that the governor's office is providing to schools for coronavirus relief. $65 million of that money was and is being distributed on a per A and B basis. The remaining $10 million is being directed to pupil transportation expenditures that are related to COVID-19. It's important that we have this discussion because a portion of it is related to how a district needs to adopt their transportation budget in the Mayfair system. And so a certain amount of cross collaboration has occurred between the Office of Public Instruction and the governor's office to assure that this can occur seamlessly or near to. I understand the time is difficult. So the intent is this. The intent is to publish this recorded presentation as soon as the governor's office gives us the green light to do so. Soon to come thereafter, we would hope to then go through this presentation again live with anybody who wants to join, and also make available a question and answer session so that you can have a clear understanding of what would be required to receive the money related to transportation and the $10 million. This is laid out as an overview, some background, and then the procedures needed to be followed. So let's begin. So it says here that the governor has provided $10 million in federal coronavirus relief funds for pupil transportation. And that is where this all starts. There are restrictions relating to these funds. They are to be used between the first day of this school year until December 30th. And so we're going to have to be clever or cautious in the way we develop the budgets and what is associated with COVID for COVID expenses for transportation between your first day of school through December 30th. And that is the only portion that can be claimed for financial assistance. I will probably refer to that as the fall COVID budget. So when budgets for transportation are developed, they're generally seen as two sections. One is the on schedule. The on schedule is paid for through county and state funds, and the over schedule is generally paid for through property taxes. In this setup, when we enter a budget into Mayfairs for transportation, the transportation budget should include all COVID-related transportation expenditures are considered as part of the budget. So I'll be referring to this as the regular budget, which would be your budget without COVID expense, and then the spring and fall COVID budgets. And hopefully this becomes clearer when we get into the details on how this works. Focusing on what the governor would pay for the fall COVID budget. As I said, we're going to budget for the on and over schedules. The over schedule would be related to property taxes, local property taxes. This offset, when applied for appropriately, will be paid directly to a district's transportation fund from the governor's office, and it will be based on the reporting that you supply to the Mayfair system and also the data that you're going to be providing to the governor's office. Additionally, the county portion will be budgeted for increases for the fall COVID portion. As you know, I hope that the on schedule is half paid for with county funds and half paid for with state funds. We recognize that your county burden or the county need or the request of the county will increase. You'll be reporting some data to the governor's office related to this. And because of that, the governor's office will be directing certain funds to the county for those increases in the fall COVID budget. The state portion of the on schedule will be distributed directly to school districts if the district reports on their Mayfair's budget appropriately and also provides the appropriate documentation to the governor's office. What will happen then is it's almost could be considered like a prepayment. So the state portion, if you report appropriately to the governor's office and in Mayfair's, the governor's office then will distribute the funds directly to your school. However, to avoid double payment on those claims, the March transportation payment distributed by the Office of Public Instruction will be reduced by the amount that was paid for the COVID portion in the fall that went directly to the district. And we'll get into that in more detail in later slides. This is just the overview. As we were doing this, and in the recognition that time is essential, I wanted to make sure that we made it known that we recognize certain things. We recognize that county transportation committee hearings most likely have already occurred. We recognize that we are in August and we understand that school district budgets need to be adopted by August 25th. We know that these things are of essential concern and that it's important that we provide this data to you immediately. Hopefully there's enough time for districts to react to what could then provide your district portion of that $10 million. Time is always is kind of an issue, so we're doing our best. I also wanted to point out that this link that's being displayed here, it's the transportation budgeting spreadsheet. If you're not familiar with this tool, it's on the OPI's website. And if you enter your routes and individual contracts to the Excel spreadsheet, it will calculate for you the on-schedule portion of a transportation's budget. We feel as though this would be a helpful tool for you to determine what your regular budget is, and then additionally, what your COVID fall budget could be. And that will help you to hold documentation that may be necessary for proving that the expenditures made for the fall COVID portion are available for audit purposes, and also to help you get organized so that you can claim for claim towards the claim to the governor's office amounts necessary for the fall portion of the COVID related expenses in a district's budget. So because this is being recorded by myself, I've added this slide. When we do this live with the question and answer period, we will have a representative from the governor's office here with myself, or we will co-present. I believe these are some of the bullets that the governor's office would like to include in their presentation. They would like to walk through with you how to fill in the application to receive the $10 million. They have a piece of software titled Submittable, and I believe that they would walk you through the process and the data necessary to input into that program. Again, I believe that they're going to request or let you know which things you'll have to enter into that program. We want to point out that this is all subject to financial audits, and we want to make sure that you understand that when you request this $10 million and your district receives it, that it's subject to audit. The fourth bullet here, which I'm sure the governor's office will go into more detail about, will include what expenditures are allowable for receiving this $10 million. Currently, it is my understanding that these expenditures will be limited to transporting of students only. And we'll have to clarify that, but I'm quite certain that that is the direction that the governor's office intends to go at this point. So before we get into the full-on process, I want to go over a brief background of transportation funding. Districts with transportation programs are required to budget for the costs of transporting students in a special revenue fund that's termed the Transportation Fund. It's Fund 10. And there's two parts to fund this, this program. One is termed the schedule, and a lot of times we talk about it as the on schedule. The word schedule appears in state law, and we've modified that to on schedule. Again, it's funded through, it's a supplement or a funding mechanism that is funded through state and county funds. It is to reimburse districts for bus routes and individual contracts. The funding for that comes from two sources. The state portion is an appropriation from the state general fund, and the county portion is through a county levy or county fund balance or county non-levy revenues. It's just a background. The second portion of a district's transportation budget is we refer to as the over schedule. And because sometimes the state and county funds of the on schedule don't quite cover the full cost of running transportation budgets or transportation expenditures, districts have the right to permissively levy to this fund in the over schedule. And so this portion of the budget is funded with permissively gathered local levies, fund balance reappropriated, and non-levy revenues. Okay, so let's get into it a little bit. I tried to lay it out step by step, just to give you the background on how you would go about determining your budget. I know most of you have already determined your transportation budgets. I also want to recognize that I probably understand that you've created your budget with the COVID portion, so I'll try to address that concern as well. So there's a few steps, and this is what we've laid out with an example. Step one, determine a non-COVID transportation budget for fiscal year 2021. And in this example, their budget's $100,000. Step two, determine the COVID transportation budget for 2021, meaning how much more in addition would your expenditures go if you're going to run routes for or reacting to COVID transportation needs. And in this case, the addition is $20,000. This is one method for determining your transportation budget for COVID-related activities. we want to identify, or I want to recognize that I understand you may be at the point where you already have the full budget together. You can go about it the opposite way and say, well, here's my full budget. How much of that is related to COVID related expenses? You're going to have to come up with some form of methodology to identify the portion of your budget that's related to COVID related expenses. I've heard lots of different methodologies. People have been calling me on the phone and discussing it with me. This is going to be a local decision, but what I have written down here, it says, my method that I'm outlined is one method for determining a transportation budget. And here are some other precautions or suggestions or needs, I suppose. After you calculate your initial non-COVID budget, however you get to that, write down how much state aid, how much county aid, and how much local property taxes that represents. In the second portion where you create the COVID budget, also now write down how much of that is related to state aid, county aid, and local property taxes. Again, the increase or the difference between a base budget that is non-COVID related or a regular budget compared to your total budget is what I'll refer to as the COVID budget. So any increases over what you normally would have budgeted. I think I've repeated that too many times, but we're doing our best. The next step is this. When you know what the COVID portion of the budget is, we'll need to split this out between fall and spring. So what I have here is a step 3A. 3A is the COVID budget for the first day of school through December 30th. So in this example, that's $9,000 of the $20,000. And as I stated in the previous slide, make sure you're able to identify how much of that $9,000 is associated with state, county, and local property taxes that fund your overschedule. The remainder of the $20,000, I just wanted to highlight again, this fall COVID portion is from the first day of school until December 30th. And it's a restriction related to the federal guidance or the federal requirements for this money. So of the $20,000, $9,000 of it is for your fall COVID budget. What I've titled here is step 3B. It's the remainder of the $20,000 or $11,000. That would be your spring COVID budget. So you may want to hang on to that number as well. This would be any portion of the COVID budget from January 1st to the end of the school year. I'm beating this topic to death, but I just really want to emphasize the portion that's highlighted here in this brown or orangey brown. The fall COVID budget is the only portion that is you can attribute to receiving funds from the $10 million pot that the governor's office is providing. So that's why it's important that we focus on the fall portion of the COVID budget so that you know that the three values there, the state, the county, and the local property taxes, are the amounts that you'll need to recognize, submit to the governor's office, and then hopefully, if once approved, receive funds from the governor's office for those expenditures related to the fall COVID budget. Okay. Once again, what will happen is once you've identified this fall budget, you'll need to report to the governor's office those three numbers. And the governor's office will have their submittable program open, and very close to August 31st, they will have the submittable program open for you so that you can go into that piece of software, enter in these three numbers so that your district then can receive funds related to your fall COVID budget. And they'll go into your transportation fund. And because you budgeted for them, you'll have the authority to make expenditures related to these. In Mayfairs, a district must anticipate the amount of the overscheduled levy as non-levy revenue in the district transportation fund before you submit your budget to OPI. I'm going to go through this on a few slides and show you how to do this in Mayfairs with Mayfair screenshots so that you can be clear as to where to place that value. Again, it's the fall COVID budget portion of the overschedule that would represent local property taxes, because you're not going to levy those local property taxes but receive dollars directly from the governor's office. You'll need to anticipate these as non-levy revenues on your budget. So the total budget that you enter into Mayfairs, and already I've recognized that you probably have this value already. I want to identify that step 4 would be to add steps 1 and 2 together. Those two values totaled, which is in this case $120,000 for this example. That's the full budget amount. You'll enter that value into Mayfairs. Again, I'm going back to what I'm talking about in that highlighted green. The overscheduled portion that is representative of what would be property taxes for your fall COVID budget need to be entered as non-levy revenues when you report your budget to the OPI. Okay, so now that we've gotten through a few pieces here, we've taken a look at how to determine your budget, how to decide what numbers to put into the submittable program of the governor's office. Let's take a look at Mayfairs for a second. In Mayfairs, there's various screens. One of them is related to the district's transportation budget. So you would go into Mayfair's budget, go to the transportation fund, and enter the adopted budget. The adopted budget, again, is the full budget, meaning your regular budget plus your COVID budget that is inclusive of both fall and spring. So it's everything that you would normally budget in any given year. And in this year is inclusive of your COVID budget. The other drop-down items there I'm not going to discuss, but if you do hold reserves or want to do an add to fund balance, that's a different topic. You can feel free to call some staff here at OPI if you're not sure what those represent. After you adopt your budget, you want to adopt your on schedule. The on schedule, like I said, was the portion of a district's budget that is funded through county and state funds. When you do this, enter your total regular budget and COVID budget. So to be clear, it's everything that you would normally budget for this cycle, inclusive of regular budget without COVID, added to full fall and spring COVID budget, total on schedule. Again, if you hold a contingency, please do so. I certainly hope you do. Okay, this is the part that is slightly different. I think I've mentioned this already, but I wanted to just really focus on this. there's a tab in the budget screen called revenues. And if you're budgeting for your fall portion of the COVID budget, we want you to click the drop down on this screen, revenues. You click add a new budget record. Then you click the drop down button, and there'll be a choice in there in Mayfair's. It's revenue budget revenue source type 7710 CARES Governor's Coronavirus Relief Fund Transportation. What you'll do is you'll do the drop down, you'll pick this choice, and you will enter the value of the amount of property taxes that would be assessed for the fall COVID portion of your budget. It's the same number that we're requesting that you report to the governor's office in the governor's office submittable software as the property tax offset for overschedule costs. Again, be certain that you do this, because here's what's going to happen. When you enter the values into the governor's program titled submittable, and you enter in there the portion that would be property taxes for your fall COVID budget, that again is going to be paid directly to your school from the governor's office. But before it gets paid to your school, I'm going to send a list of districts and how much they recorded as non-levy revenues on their budget. They're going to compare the values. If the values don't match, or if the value is not there, the governor's office will not distribute the portion of property tax relief to the overschedule for your transportation, your fall COVID transportation. So I'll say one last time, you have to budget non-levy revenues in the amount that is the property tax offset for fall COVID relief for transportation. Okay, so that's how you're going to budget Mayfair's. It's not too tricky. It's a matter of entering your regular budget, entering your regular on schedule, I guess your total budget, your total on schedule. And then the only new thing for a lot of folks may be estimating or placing the overschedule property tax portion that is attributable to fall COVID relief in as a non-levy revenue. This assures that property taxes are not assessed, and instead the money comes directly from the governor's office, from the $10 million pot of money. Let's talk about revenue a little bit, and I may read through these a little bit more cautiously. So the governor's office is going to distribute funds for both state, county, and the overschedule levy portion relating to the fall portion of your COVID budget. Just putting it out there, the governor's office will pay the amount of state offset directly to schools. It will be the amount that you reported to the governor's office. A list of the distributed amounts will be sent to the OPI when they make the distribution or after they're done making those distributions. The OPI will take the amounts that had been distributed for state payments for the fall COVID relief and reduce those amounts off your Transportation One payment. If for some reason the Transportation One payment is fully covered for with the governor's distribution and there's still more to be reduced off, it will come off your Transportation Two claim payment, which occurs in June. Most cases, or the normal case we envision, is that the reduction would happen off the March payment, the Trans One payment. Next, the county portion. remembering that you placed in there your full budgeted amount, and that would be inclusive of the county piece that would increase county levies. And because you reported to the governor's submittable software program the amount of fall COVID related county need, the governor's office will be totaling up those values by county. We've considered joint districts. Don't concern yourself. Well, I think we've got that covered. These amounts then will be sent to the counties, and they will go into the county transportation fund, and that will be used to fund that portion of the county for transportation before the county assesses its county levies. Therefore, property taxes associated with county transportation levies will not be increased relating to the amount of county increase from the fall COVID budget for districts. So this really emphasized that this requires districts to, I know we're very late on this, but please, as soon as the submittable program opens for the governor's office, report your values in there. Assure that we can get this done in a manner in which it makes it so that counties can receive these funds before the county assesses their levies. Okay, finally, the local property taxes, or what would be local property taxes. Because you're reporting that amount to the governor's office, the governor will then distribute this amount to the district after the governor's office verifies with the OPI that that value was estimated as non-levy revenues in the district's transportation budget for 2021. So we're kind of cross-checking. We're assuring that distributions for the offset of property taxes for the fall portion of the COVID budget have been estimated as non-levy revenues, and thereby not both increasing local property taxes and also receiving funds from this $10 million. This does a few things. One, it holds down property taxes. The other is, if you had a double distribution, you wouldn't have the budget authority to make the expenditure. And we're trying to assure that this thing fits within the budget and the budget authority for expending the funds. Finally, we wanted to point out that there is some accounting that has been set up. The revenue source type is 7710. The funds will be deposited into Fund 10. The money from the governor's office is going to be inclusive of the state offset and the local property tax offset. It will most likely come as one value to your district. We have it broken out. You'll have it broken out. The governor's office has it broken out, but we want you to receipt these funds under 7710 into your transportation fund, which you have budgeted for, and therefore you have the right to make expenditures and the authority to do so. When you make those expenses, please use program code 771. There are requirements of the federal government that we are able to track expenditures of these funds. I believe there's quarterly requirements to do so. As you know, at the end of next fiscal year, 2021, your trustee's financial summary will then have these values reported to the OPI at that time. Please keep in mind that all of this is subject to audit, so no matter what you do, when you develop your budget, you make your expenditures, please assure that the expenditures of 771, or I guess another way to say it is the $10 million from the governor's office, is spent for corona-related activities I'm going to allow that to be discussed in further detail when we have the question and answer period in a subsequent meeting related to these funds. That is the end of this presentation. I really appreciate you listening, and I hope this works for your district. And I really hope that you apply for these funds. More to come. Thanks for listening again. Have a good day.